Welcome, Comic Army. I am the Comic Vet. I decided to start a little challenge for a few of my YouTube friends. I'd like everyone to talk about the first time they bought their very first comic book with their own money. Now, myself, growing up, late 70s, early 80s, my parents would often buy me comic books to read. I would often get like Archie's or, Richie Rich or Archie in digest form. A lot of these, what I don't want to refer to it as kiddie comic books, but they're basically just introductories to comic book reading. Here and there I would get sprinkled in some superhero comic books. I remember in the late 70s, early 80s when the Christopher Reeve Superman movies were being pumped out, that since I was a fan, my mom and dad would often, when they go out to do their shopping, would pick me up one if they happen to see one, at their checkout when they're doing whatever shopping they were doing at the time. But in late 1983, I started getting an allowance, and my allowance back then was $5. So $5 per week, I would have a couple chores that I would have to do, and I'd get the cash, and then it was free for me to do whatever I wanted. 9 times out of 10, I would go to the little corner variety store, convenience store, pick up a bag of chips, can of pop, stuff like that. And then the neighborhood mall where I grew up in Toronto had a variety store, a convenience store, and they decided to install this large wall and sell comic books. Well, there's a few times previous to my first venture there that my father took me there and would have no problem buying me 3 or 4 different comic books. Now, a little story about my dad. My dad grew up in the eastern part of the eastern part of Canada, in the province called Newfoundland. And it was one of the few things that him and I had in common, because he grew up in such a different culture in a small fishing village compared to what I grew up in the big city of Toronto, was the fact that we both enjoyed comic books. So my dad had no problem springing a few dollars here and there to share something that he knew that he enjoyed as a young man growing up himself. So during those times, I would basically pick up comic books when he was picking up the tab, ones that I would recognize from either cartoons or movies. So I would pick up Superman, of course. I would pick up SpiderMan, because Spider-Man's cartoons were always in the reruns from the 60s edition, plus Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends were out at the time. I would pick up the Fantastic Four. They had a cartoon in the late 70s, early 80s, along with Captain America. And, I would even try and get the Green Hornet, because I remember watching that live-action TV show on rerun, and of course Batman as well. But I remember specifically the first day that I went there and I bought comic books with my own money. That particular day, I only bought 1 comic book, and I remember looking at this big wall of new comic books that had been released in the last month or two. And I remember looking through all the different titles. Which one am I going to get? Which one can I get? What can I afford? And the book that I bought, surprise, surprise, was The Amazing Spider-Man. And late 1985, maybe October 1985, is when I picked up that book. It was Spider-Man 274. I had just turned 10 years old. Yes, my parents let me venture around the big city by myself. I was probably with a friend, though. And I remember picking up The Amazing Spider-Man 274 for a few different specific reasons. That it was a Secret Wars 2 tie-in, that the comic book claimed that it had no ads, and it was 32 pages of story. And in that particular issue, the Beyonder, who was the villain from the Secret Wars and Secret Wars 2 crossover event, was battling Mephisto. course, everyone knows Mephisto. He was supposed to have an appearance in WandaVision, but he didn't. Anyways, the book that I picked up was only 95 cents, and this is that particular issue. As you can see, it is pretty beat up. It's got stains here on Aunt May's face. It was the UPC variant, but the cover is really beat up. The book is in rough shape. It would probably grade a 2.5. If you want to talk about spine ticks, like it looks like it's been driven over a few times, but that just goes to show how much I enjoyed this book. I remember reading it and reading it and reading it, and even studying the art and just falling in love with the character over again. Flash forward years and years later, I was gifted this book when I told the same story, and this was the gift. It's 9.8 white pages. It's the direct edition, but I'm very happy to have it in my collection, both copies. And yeah, just so everyone knows, it was a Tom DeFalco story. John Romita did the interiors, and Larry Lieber and John Romita did the cover. The Beyonder, Mephisto, Kingpin, and Zethros have an appearance, and inside the cover, there's a pinup. So it actually truly was no ads, and they backed it up even on the back cover. No ads. So yeah, the direct edition here does say that it was 75 cents in the United States, 40 pence in the United Kingdom, and 95 cents here in Canada. And that's what it is. And again, my copy just says 95 cents. So it kind of makes me wonder, is this a UPC Canadian variant? But I don't want to go down that road. Anyways, that's the story of the very first comic book that I ever bought with my own money way back when. Now I'd like to issue the challenge to 6 different YouTubers and hope that they tell the story of their first comic book that they bought with their own money, and challenge, say, 3 more of their own favorite YouTube channels. So with that being said, I'd like to challenge first my partner in crime for 2 Cool Guys, 2 Hot Picks, Mark from Legion of Comics. I'd like to challenge the nicest guy in the comic book YouTube community, Slotted Up 503. Jason, you're number 2. Gary B, the casual comic guy, just on the other side of the Canadian-American border in Rochester, New York. Also like to challenge Kidrano Prince. This is a young guy that kindly often leaves comments on my videos. Let's find out what you read for the first time. I like to challenge Dave from Dave's Dungeons, my brother out in cold Minnesota. Him and I both know what it's like to live every day in cold weather. Dave, tell me the story about your first comic book. And last but not least, from Brooklyn, New York, the man who made a guest appearance on last week's 2 Cool Guys, 2 Hot Picks, the man who just rolled over 1,000 subscribers. Quite an accomplishment. DJ Lynx, brother, tell us what your first comic book was that you bought. Comic Army, hope this video finds you safe and well. Comic Bet, out.